Back in 2011, a book came out with a title you just couldn't ignore, Suicide of a Superpower. And let me tell you, it wasn't just some political critique. No, the author, Patrick Buchanan, was making a full-blown forecast.
And right there on the cover, in the subtitle, was this absolutely jaw-dropping question. Will America survive to the year 2025? I mean, talk about setting the stakes high, right? That's the core question we're going to be looking at. Okay, so let's get into it. What we're going to do in this explainer is unpack the main arguments from this pretty controversial book. And just to be super clear, our goal here isn't to say whether he was right or wrong. We're just here to break down why he made such a dark prediction in the first place.
All right, so the first big piece of his argument is this idea that America is basically coming apart at the seams. He's saying that the cultural glue, the stuff that used to hold everyone together, it's dissolving.
And to show just how serious he thinks this is, the author brings in a quote from a former president, Jimmy Carter. The point he's making is, hey, this isn't your normal political squabbling. He's arguing it's a deep, fundamental split, maybe even as bad as the run-up to the Civil War.
So, where are these cracks, these fault lines? Well, according to the book, they're everywhere. It's not just about disagreeing on taxes or healthcare anymore. He argues that Americans are now fighting over the really big stuff, what they believe, what's right and wrong, what their own history means, even the whole point of politics itself.
And here's the thing. This deep cultural divide, the book claims, makes it almost impossible to fix the problems he sees in his second major point. A massive shift in the economy, from a nation that makes things to a nation that, well, mostly consumes and owes money. To back this up, he starts throwing around some huge numbers, like this one, a $1.4 trillion deficit in just 1 year. That was 10% of the entire economy back in 2009. For him, this wasn't just a budget issue. It was a flashing red light signaling a much deeper decline.
And check this out. The total national debt was careening towards 100% of the country's entire economic output for a year. The book warned that hitting this level was playing with fire. It meant the world's biggest lender had become the world's biggest borrower, putting it at risk of either a catastrophic default or out-of-control inflation.
This slide really paints a picture of his whole maker versus taker argument. Just look at the numbers. Over 50 years, you see an almost perfect flip. Manufacturing jobs, the makers, went down. And government jobs, what he calls the takers, more than doubled. He presents this as the story of America's economic transformation in a nutshell.
Now, this whole economic shift, he says, is happening at the same time as the third major pillar of his argument, a demographic revolution that he argues is changing the very face and character of the country, and doing it fast.
He uses data like this to make his point. He zooms in on the percentage of white children in kindergarten, showing a pretty significant drop in just a decade. He sees this as a kind of canary in the coal mine, a sign of a massive demographic shift that's starting with the youngest generation.
And to really hammer home the scale of this change, the author drops the surreally blunt quote from a former director of the U.S. Census Bureau. Now, he was talking specifically about Texas, but the book uses it to argue that these demographic changes aren't some far-off future thing. They're already here.
So then the author pulls the camera back. He argues that all these internal divisions in America, the cultural, the economic, the demographic, they aren't just happening in a bubble. He says they're connected to one last, powerful global trend, the return of tribalism.
He's talking about ethnonationalism, this idea that your primary loyalty is to your own tribe, your own ethnic group. He says this force, which kind of seemed to be fading away for a while, is coming back with a vengeance all over the world, and it's tearing multi-ethnic countries apart.
And for evidence, he points to research from the political scientist Robert Putnam. Putnam's studies suggested that as communities become more diverse, people from all backgrounds tend to hunker down. They trust their neighbors less, they get less involved civically, and that social trust, that fabric of community, starts to weaken.
And all of this leads to the book's final, pretty grim conclusion. When you pile on cultural warfare, a mountain of debt, massive demographic shifts, and this rise of tribalism, the author argues that the very things that once held America together, a shared faith, language, culture, history, they're all dissolving. The foundation itself, he says, is cracking.
So there you have it, the core arguments from Suicide of a Superpower. And remember, this was all written over a decade ago. That 2025 deadline is right around the corner. Which leaves us with the big question, right? Was this book a prophecy, a glimpse into an unavoidable future, or was it a warning about a path we could still choose to get off of?